want to introduce Mark Roselle, the Dean of the Schar School of Policy and Government. So Mark.
Thank you, David. We're absolutely delighted that you joined us today. And this webinar from the Robotics Process Automation Initiative is the latest in a series which points to possible technology solutions to make government at all levels more effective, more efficient. So today we focus on robotics process automation, RPA, in the Department of Defense. As David and Erica, soon to be introduced, will discuss, use of RPA also enables our public sector workforce focus on higher valued programs and outcomes. So we believe the Schar School is in a unique place for these discussions as we bring together business, government, and the academic world to promote better results for government. I invite you to participate in other Schar School program offerings on a wide variety of policy initiatives. Go to the Schar School website, go to our Twitter page, join it. There are constant updates about all the different programs we have with our centers and research institutes. And I'm sure you'll enjoy to be a part of these and to participate in ones of particular interest to you. So thank you for being with us today. And now, David, back to you.
Thank you, Mark, and thanks for being with us.
Of course.
We, of course, are glad that you're all with us today. As Mark mentioned, I am David Rehr, Director of the Center for Business Civic Engagement at the Schar School. This is the latest of our webinar series on the subject of public sector adoption of robotic process automation technology and the benefits that accrue or result from implementing it. The title for today's webinar is RPA in Action at the U.S. Department of Defense, Current Strategies and Future Expectations. I'm very excited to have Ms. Erica Thomas with us today. Erica works for the Office of the Secretary of Defense. She is currently the Director of Digital Transformation and Financial Management, IT Portfolio Management, and the Program Manager for Robotics Process Automation Initiatives, which includes a shared service platform to help promulgate RPA within DOD. She also leads the DOD's RPA Consortium and is an active champion for the federal RPA community of practice. Ms. Thomas is a graduate of Central Michigan University. She holds a professional membership in the American Society for Military Comptrollers as a certified defense financial manager, and she is the recipient of many awards, including the Department of Navy's Superior Civilian Service Medal, among others. We are so excited that you're with us today, Erica, and we look forward to your insights. And let me begin by asking the first question. Erica, what first led you to introducing RPA at the Department of Defense, and how did you find out about this relatively new technology?
Sure, thanks, David. Thanks for having me. Happy to share our experience. And again, everything I share today will be my own opinion, not necessarily, DOD at large, but this is, my stance on kind of where I've sat within our program. I actually didn't hear about RPA until I believe it was 2019, so it has not been that long. The secretary at the time had put out his agenda items, his primary focus areas. One of them was to reform the way the DOD does business. So there were a bunch of reform teams that were stood up, focused on specific business lines. I was the deputy for the FM reform team. And one of the areas we were looking at was technology. What is some technology that is maybe new or new to the federal space or new to DOD that potentially we could take advantage of to streamline and make our business processes more efficient, reform the way that we're doing business. So under financial management reform, we had a small contract looking at a couple of different projects, exploring opportunities. One of them was a simple line item asking our vendor at the time to say, hey, what's this RPA thing? Tell us about it, go out and assess if there's opportunity space in DOD. And I would say within 2 months, less than that actually, it was readily apparent, absolutely, there is an opportunity space for this. And from there, we kind of took off. And really it was, let's just identify a couple of use cases, see if we can partner with some organizations in DOD that had already been looking into this, and let's move out and do that. So that's really how we got involved under the previous secretaries, reforming the way DOD does business. But the reality is we always need to be looking at how can we make our business processes more efficient. So, you know, our administration has changed, but the reality is we're still continuing on with this technology because there's benefits. It just makes sense.
Now, Erica, when you brought the RPA concept in, we know that history is filled with people who get nervous about change and new technologies. How did you find there was angst among some of the DOD employees, the leadership, when you first introduced RPA? And then what did you do to kind of communicate and message what was going on to them, to put any fears they might have, to minimize any fears they might have?
So I think there's a couple ways to break that down. First of all, it's leadership. So selling this to my leadership as an opportunity for potential reform, it really was, hey, this is the concept, this is what it will do, or this is what we expect it will do. Let's do some pilots. So I know some groups have gone and they've set up a full center of excellence, and before they've even started moving out on automations. That's not what we did. We did a kind of a crawl, walk, run approach to say, okay, we think that this is a good opportunity space. Let's try it out. Let's get some pilots. Let's get some wins on the board to then sell those stories to our leadership to help them see there is value in continuing this and to continue to grow the program. So in those earlier automations, can you build success stories, vignettes, if you will, to sell the benefits that we're realizing or will realize shortly, to then again continue and promulgate. So that was specific messaging for leadership. Then you had the messaging for the employees. You know, I joke I'm at the OSD level, so I don't actually do real work. I'm, you know, paper pusher, policymaker. I don't go into systems and touch buttons. So when you're looking at opportunities for RPA, you need the buy-in. Like I need those desk level folks who are living and breathing those processes to raise their hand and say, help me, right? So really trying to find those right people is really critical. And yeah, there are some people that maybe they like the standard mundane, you know, every day I come in and click this button 200 times, right? But for the most part, people were very amenable. The groups that we were reaching out to, these are not tasks they love to do. We definitely had messaging of, you know, this is not out to reduce our workforce. This is not about FTE cuts or you know, cuts to HR. Not at all. This is about improving the way we do business. We have more than enough to do that we're not able to get done, frankly. So as we have more and more priorities to focus on, how do we just do things smarter? And maybe you won't have to come in and hit that button 200 times a day, but maybe you're going to come in, do some more, some different work. Maybe it's more cognitive. Maybe it's something else, but hopefully it's something that is more, more challenging. And potentially improves just general employee morale. So we definitely had to have those conversations, but surprisingly, it was not as significant as I thought it would be. Most of the people were, you know, saying, help me, please help me figure out how to do this smarter. Again, these are not things the things that we automate are not things people love to do day in and day out. They're looking for solutions, or this is something that maybe it's a new requirement and they literally just can't do it because the amount of time and the bandwidth they have available to do it, it's like they're never going to meet the requirement. So that was kind of the messaging for the employees. Now, in terms of people's nervousness, if I had to say what group in DOD was probably the most nervous, wasn't even the employees, it was our cyber folks. It was our IT staff.
Yeah.
So I personally don't believe in calling these bots. So when you build an automation, it's an automation. If you want to call it something, call it a digital assistant, something like that. I think earlier on, people were calling them bots. And when you talk and use that lexicon with our cyber folks or your cyber community, they're, especially in DOD, their job is to protect against bots. Like they're defending against those. Yes, those are outside. And now here we are internal saying, hey, we want to build bots. So there was definitely, I would say, the biggest challenge in terms of getting things off of the ground was really engaging with our cyber IT groups to get them to understand what RPA is capable of, what it's not capable of, and how you can do it smartly without a threat to the network.
Yeah, that's good. So, what were some of the lessons that you learned when you first started? Like if I was with another agency and I'm starting to look at RPA now, what kind of lessons could you lend me where I could maybe crawl a little faster before I would stand up and walk or run?
Well, number one is I would recommend crawling. So just get started and beg, borrow, and steal anything you can from other groups that are open to sharing. There's a lot of forums. We have a DOD RPA consortium. The federal space has a federal RPA community of practice. I find most groups that are into RPA and moving on it are very open to sharing. So beg, borrow, and steal and just get started. I have seen a handful of groups, I mentioned this earlier, take a lot of time standing up and maturing a center of excellence before they actually deploy automations. And that has typically taken them 8+ months, if not longer. And I don't know about, it's been a while since I was in private industry, but when I think 8+ months, I'm already over it. You're already on to other things. It's potentially not going to be a hot priority anymore. It's lost some of the buzz. So, you could take that approach, but my recommendation would be to crawl and just find some good use cases and get those success stories like started so that you're proving it out, you're immediately getting wins, and then you can build your program, build your center of excellence from there. Some of the things that I wish I would have known before I got started, so things that surprised me. And just for full disclosure, I know, David, you mentioned earlier, we in Comptroller DOD, we have a shared service platform to really try to help promulgate RPA across the department. So in order to get the software approved and the different components stood up on the networks, some of them require ATOs or authority to operate. And that process in DOD, and I believe some of the other federal agencies, it's not simple. It's actually quite painful, especially for a non-IT person like myself. So if you're a business area trying to kind of navigate these channels, it gets very challenging. So we took the time to get our platform ATO'd so that not only we could use it, but also other groups could use it. And we have both UiPath and Automation Anywhere on the platform. So we're open to having others too if there's business cases for it. So we're technology agnostic. But as we were standing that up, my example, we first started with UiPath. What I didn't know, and everything we have right now is attended, we were developing and deploying on physical machines. So we didn't have a virtual environment. We were doing them on laptops, desktops, what have you. And it was terrible. So you can still do it, but RPA, because it's so sensitive, if there are configurations and settings, maybe on my computer that are not on the end user's computer, when we deploy that automation, it might cause a problem. And now you're going to spend time that I don't want you to spend if you're my developer. You're going to spend time troubleshooting, trying to get that automation to work for that individual employee as an attended automation. So we spent a lot of time, as I call it, eating our own lunch, trying to develop and deploy onto physical machines. And what I always recommend to new programs getting started, think about your virtual environments right away. I wish we would have done that right from the start. It took us a long time, and quite frankly, COVID was really the genesis that got us to push over into virtual, because prior to COVID, we were standing up separate desktops in the office. This is going to be the station for running automations, and it'll be standard and stable, but it still wasn't a great approach, especially as we all kind of got sent home for X number of months. So it really forced us to look at virtual environments. That's really critical. And that's probably, I would say, number one. And the other thing that was surprising is with attended automations, I didn't realize this, and sometimes the vendors don't advertise it heavily when you're talking about it, but with you attended automations, if I'm somebody that gets the automation and now I'm running it on my computer, if that automation takes, say 30 minutes to run, when it's running, I can't do anything else on my computer. I'm locked. Now, is it still saving me time? You would hope so. And in all of our cases, it has. It's still, it's a more efficient process, but I can't do anything else while that's running on my computer. So it's a little bit disappointing because, you know, your assumption is you get all of that time back, right? And that was not the case. By us switching to virtual environments, not only did we solve for the rework challenge that we were having with the development and deploying, we also solved for that lockdown period when an automation runs.
Right.
So virtual, definitely recommend it.
Yeah. And if you can, Erica, could you give us some examples of some of the automations you put into DOD to try to, you know, increase the efficiency of the organization?
Sure. I think I'll go a little high level first, and then I'll get down into some specifics. So
Okay.
in DOD, we've actually seen some significant movements with RPA over the past, I'd say, year and a half. I run, or I co-lead the DOD RPA consortium with another member from Army. And I think we do informal quarterly data calls, just asking for people to share, hey, what are the automations you're working on or have already deployed, just so that we have a sense of what's going on. And again, if you built something that I might want, can we share it? Or can you give me that? And I can start from that point, and it saves a lot of time and efficiency. And most groups are willing to do that.
Yeah.
So we have a quarterly data call, which is really nice. And it's voluntary. So we know there's more out there, but I think the last quarterly data call that we put out there, we had over 500 automations identified in the
Wow.
various stages of from development to deployment. And I think of those 500 plus, we had like 325 plus were actually deployed and in use. So we're seeing a lot of movement. Again, it's voluntary. We know there's more out there. They're just not providing them to this data call. But 60% roughly of those are related to financial management processes. I think 18 to 20% are related to logistics processes. And then I think we've got personnel, acquisition, IT, all registering just under 10 or so. So it's definitely hitting a lot of the different business lines, which is exciting. And again, it keeps growing.
Yeah.
So some examples specifically, and I'll talk to my own shop on that side. So in addition to the shared service platform that we offer for these other RPA programs, just to connect to our platform so they don't have to go through the pain of the ATO that I talked about earlier, trying to remove the barriers of entry. I have a small group of developers that will focus on specific automation ideas. OSD Comptroller, which is where I sit, we typically have more engagement operationally with the fourth estate, so defense agencies. And particularly there's 24 plus agencies all on one accounting system, which is the defense DAI is the name of the accounting system. And looking at that as a target opportunity to say, hey, instead of all those 24 agencies potentially getting into RPA independently, why don't we go out and talk to them, all of them, and say, hey, where are there opportunity spaces here that we can collectively build these, and then let all of you use them, or whoever wants to use them, leverage them. So I think the very first automation that we developed was in partnership with the Washington Headquarters Services, WHS. And this was actually to clear unmatched disbursements in that accounting system. And what was really refreshing with WHS, who's been a great partner, is, you know, they'd already been looking into RPA and were super excited. They already had a couple of ideas identified. These were like the desk level folks. And it was like, that's what we need here. Because again, I can't come up with the ideas on my own. we need those ideas. So they came up with the ideas and they were already basically ready to go. They just didn't have anyone to build them. They needed the developers. And, you know, yes, there's free training online and you can go take, these classes and, the UiPath University and what have you. But you really do need somebody that knows what they're doing. And luckily I had that support. I had some contractors that were trained and were able to immediately jump on it. So the automation we built, it's pretty simple. It was attended. So that means a person is running the automation using their own credentials to execute and kick off the automation. What it does is when there's an unmatched transaction, there's a couple of things, that data entry points that have to happen in the accounting system to clear it. So the RPA piece alone is really just automating the data entry to do those clearing entries into the accounting system, because WHS had, at this point in time, over 10,000 UMDs in backlog, and it was just growing. They weren't able to, it was an issue. So they needed some automation to really help them clear that backlog and then maintain it after that. So the automation basically takes an Excel spreadsheet. The person that was doing the research before, basically, instead of using their old spreadsheet, uses the standard template that's part of the automation. And the automation uses that to then kick off and do the data entry under their login, because they're running it in the accounting system. So that one was, I think, the very first automation that we deployed, and it's data entry. Another example is, I would say, report consolidation. So in fiscal quarters or fiscal year end particularly, we have a departmental reporting system where one of our groups in Comptroller was having to go out multiple times during, well, they wanted to go out multiple times during a reporting period and pull down all of the different reports from the system to consolidate them and then do analysis on that. The problem was the amount of time that it took to download these 160 reports, because DOD is pretty big and this is the OSD level. So to download 160 reports and then put that information into an Excel file, it was a Herculean task, and they were doing it maybe once a quarter, right? Maybe once a reporting period. And the reality is those positions are constantly changing until the reporting period locks. And if you want to do analysis up to the point that it locks, and then afterwards, you need to be able to get that done quickly. And you can't do that. So we built an automation that goes and pulls down all of the 160 reports. It does some validation checks, because this report should equal this report, and sometimes it doesn't. We have some validation checks built in that would be flagged to let them know, hey, this person, you need to now reach back out to this other organization to check on that. And then also, once it does the validations, it takes the data from all those reports, consolidates it into an Excel file, and then that is readily available for that person to immediately do the analysis. And this bot, normally, I think when they were having to do this manually, it took them a day and a half to download all the reports, very painful. And the bot itself now, when it runs, it takes about 3.5 hours to run. So there's a big efficiency gain there.
Yeah.
But back to my earlier point, when we didn't have virtual environments, it was still 3.5 hours of somebody's life while that's churning on the computer. That now that we have a virtual solution, it's 3.5 hours extra that they also get back.
Yeah, that's neat. That's neat. So within the scope of national security always, what are some future plans or ideas you have for RPA expansion at the DOD? We don't want to give you any national secrets away, because you never know who's listening to this webinar, but what are some things you're planning to look into, maybe to try to focus on in the future?
So, disregarding maybe the security aspect, but I think, where I'm excited to see kind of RPA go is looking at more kind of compliance processes. Where can we integrate RPA into more of our audit response compliance areas? As DOD is really pushing to get a clean audit opinion, we're going to have a lot of things come up where, technology is going to have to be leveraged to make it possible. In terms of, even pulling sample sets for the auditors and all of that. I think there's a lot of goodness there as we mature in the audit. I think there's also a lot of opportunity in some of the other business lines like HR.
Yeah.
personnel that, maybe haven't gotten the full breadth there. And I personally think there's a lot of opportunity even in IT. So I mentioned earlier, one of our challenge points was, was with our cyber shop, because bots are bad, right? Getting them to understand, this is not scary if done the right way. What I've really been trying to push, and I think there's a lot of opportunity here, is there are business processes within IT, maybe even username password resets, whatever it is within the IT space that this technology could be used for. What better way to alleviate their concerns is to get them to use it, get their hands on it, touch it, feel it, build it, enjoy it, benefit from it, and go from there. So I think there's a lot of opportunity space in the IT world as well.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier logistics. What kind of automations or what kind of thinking does DOD have on the logistics? Because I know you guys move a lot around constantly as the Department of Defense. What kind of logistic applications are there for RPA?
I unfortunately can't speak to specifics on that. So the Defense Logistics Agency, DLA, they are very big into RPA. They have an excellent program.
Yeah.
They have, I think, almost 100 automations deployed, and I believe 90% of their automations are deployed unattended. So they're pretty impressive. So I can't really speak to their specific automations, but I do know that there is a large opportunity space.
Right. Right. And I know that you're helping non-DOD departments and agencies with RPA implementation. This is the federal kind of RPA report, the consortium. We talked with somebody from GSA the other day about getting people to share good practices, increasing the knowledge base of RPA. What kind of things have you talked to people about, and like what kind of recommendations would you have to further expand this across government? Because I read different agencies are using it, but I keep thinking it'll be great someday when every department, every agency has their own automations, so we can liberate all those people who are doing mundane things and allow them higher value to their jobs and what they're doing, frankly, for the country and all the citizens.
Mm-hmm. So I'm an active member of the federal RPA community of practice, which is led by GSA. I think Gerard, but I forget his last name, Bedoric. Their CFO is kind of the main champion over there, and he's been great. I think the community of practice is a great opportunity space to, again, wherever you can, share what your program has done, any of the lessons learned that you've had, maybe even resources, right? So I know a lot of times in the early stages, people are like, how do you identify opportunities? Do you need a questionnaire? What are the things that you're going to ask people, right? I know myself, my own group, we have shared, our questionnaire. We've shared our process assessment methodology. So when we get an idea in, what are we looking at to determine, is this a good idea? Because, not a news shocker here, not every idea is a good one. We've had ideas come in from as simple as, no, this is not RPA. Let me show you how to use Excel. That kind of basic thing, to the point where we'll also get really sophisticated ideas submitted that they're like, RPA alone is not going to cut this. You're going to need to move into machine learning, AI type technology to really tackle this one. So it really runs the gamut. But we've shared our process assessment methodology with the federal community. We also share it within DOD. And I think those community of practices, again, if you can find them, are a great way to get programs up and running a lot faster than 3 years ago, when I think we were just trying to figure out like who's doing what. Can we figure that out? Now there's actually places you can go that have websites and like points of contacts and group mailboxes and regular meetings, right? And places where they're storing and sharing documents. Or creating, guidebooks or handbooks. So I think a lot of that has been really helpful. And it's even been helpful for us to organize, our Center of Excellence. Let's, package all of that together. And, these are the guidelines that we're going to follow as an RPA program. And we're always happy to share those with other groups. So The federal community of practice has regular meetings. I would say they definitely meet more than our DOD RPA consortium, because quite frankly, I don't have the time to organize all of those, but they have a lot of really good meetings, and on a whole variety of topics. And I volunteered to be part of a number of those panels. And even when I'm not part of the panel, if I have time, I call in, and I usually always learn something new, something informative I can take away.
Right. That's great. So I should have asked this question earlier, but when you were putting in the automations, did you find that there were processes that you no longer needed or that you had to tweak a little bit to improve the automation? And, I know when we had GSA on a few weeks ago, they said they actually learned things through RPA that they no longer needed to do. Didn't seem as valuable as it was. And I know in my own life, even when I'm teaching, you always have to kind of reassess rather than just putting things on automation, quote unquote, and just keep doing the same thing over and over again, where I like to go back and make sure that it's one, right, and two, that it's value laden for the students, in my case as a professor.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we get an automation idea that comes in the door, and if we assess it and we think it now is a good idea, and we have the follow-on conversations, hey, let's walk through what's your current process. You always want to start there, understand the current as is, but then always you're looking at it from a lens of, is there any business process re-engineering that needs to happen? Because just because they're doing that today, and that's the standard monotonous way they're tapping the keys, doesn't mean there's not additional efficiencies that you need to bake into a process before you automate it, because you don't want to automate a bad process. So as we go out and do that, we will have tweaks to the current as is to also think about how do you make the automation efficient, as well as the deployment strategy for the automation. So
Yeah.
You might say, if you've got 20 individuals all doing this, but if you can automate it, well, maybe we don't need all 20 being kind of the human oversight. Maybe now we're going to revamp the process, and now these 5 are going to be the human supervisors of their digital bots.
Yeah, that's excellent. Do you other than the approval process you already touched upon, do you see any other insurmountable or difficult barriers to further RPA integration in the public sector generally, or at the DOD?
Again, I will go back to, and this could be selfishly because I am a business area, so I'm financial management, I'm an accountant. I would say the one area that always comes up as a challenge point, and it's not insurmountable, it's not, is with the cyber and the IT community. Right. So, how do we build and sustain automations with the right infrastructure in place, with the right approvals for the software? So as the vendors are updating, the version of their software, adding additional capabilities, additional add-ons that you can potentially leverage, how do we efficiently communicate and coordinate with those cyber shops that we need to get the approval for implementing on, the DoD machines, and then hopefully virtual machines.
Yeah. And then before we get to questions, and we have a couple questions here, are there any other thoughts that come to mind when we talk about RPA and public agencies? I know we had a conversation about looking at how you actually define its success. In the private sector, it's all about ROI. I mean, I meet business people every week who say, David, what's the ROI? And I'm sure there's some ROI on automation, but even the private sector people say it's not necessarily just about financial return. It's about more than that. And I know you have an opinion on that. And what do you think that is? What do you think the return is?
So firstly, again, I am an accountant. So I joke, we're bean counters. We want to have ROI, right? We want numbers. We want to be able to book things. However, in relation to RPA, we are not out to cut the workforce. We have more than enough to do. In fact, we can't get it all done. We just need to be able to use our resources more efficiently. So this is not about reducing staff, right? So people should not be fearful of their jobs. And the reality is, if you are not touching the labor, the labor categories, then you're not technically booking savings. So there's not a line item in your budget that says, oh, I saved this. So I actually don't use the term ROI. I've trained myself, and leaders should be like, nope, we're going to use return on effort. So the reality is, yes, we do track labor hours redirected, because we want the numbers and the dollar equivalents, because again, we are accountants, we still want the numbers. But it's also about those other benefits, right? What are the overall efficiencies that you've gained? What other metrics, operational metrics, maybe you've improved? Reductions in rework and errors, what have you, improvements to employee morale. All of those types of things really are the major benefits of RPA. And again, to your point, when you talk to even private industry, yes, they might still use ROI, but when they talk about what are your top 10 benefits, if ROI is on the list, typically from what I've seen, it's usually in the 8th to 10th position on that list. So even private industry is acknowledging it's not the number one, it's not even in the top 5. So it's there, it's something that should be discussed. You should have mechanisms that you can track the labor hours redirected, but it's not the end all be all. So again, ROE versus ROI.
Yeah. Just to add a point to that, I've seen some studies which talk about how many of our public sector agencies and their employees feel like, because we're in this age of technology, they're constantly working. They constantly have things to do, and RPA maybe helps liberate them, because there are things they no longer need to do because the automation takes care of it. So they don't feel so pressured into performing 24 hours a day on an 8-hour day.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's even going to become, as people have they look for a more balanced life. I think we're going to see more of that among younger people. I know some of my students, when I was in college, it was all about, you graduate, you make money, you try to become a millionaire, you buy a big car, you have a big house. Now I talk to a lot of students who just want to do well, but they don't have the same drive towards the material things, but they all also ask themselves, what kind of contribution am I making? How am I making my community better? And it seems to me not so much driven by kind of old school. And I happen to be an economist, as you know, old school economics of just maximizing your return.
That's how do you make an impact, right?
Right.
You
right.
want all the best, but you want to be doing something good.
Right. That's exactly right.
How have I contributed?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, if we can, Erica, let's go to some of the questions that I have. So the first is, how can RPA compete in this era of somewhat constrained government resources?
There can be challenges there. The reality is, though, an RPA program is not super expensive to get off the ground. And quite frankly, you can make the case that, RPA as a solution sometimes is going to save you a lot more money, quite frankly. And I say that because maybe, you have a system change request that's in the queue for a significant system, say it's an ERP type system. And maybe that system change request is going to take $5 million and 3 years to do. The reality, right?
Right.
So RPA, if it's a viable candidate, depends on what we're talking about. RPA could be something that solves for that in the short term, midterm, or even long term, so that you don't have to spend $5 million in 3 years while people live through the 3 years of pain with whatever is wrong, when RPA could potentially be a solution in a matter of months.
Yeah.
So, I think you just have to figure out how to tell the story and to balance it. RPA is not the solution for everything. Like that needs to be out there and just acknowledged. But there are absolutely use cases that support its use. And again, the software itself is relatively inexpensive. So if you break down the cost of, like, even if you focus on just UiPath, the developer licenses and, an attended license, forgetting about, their UiPath orchestrator and the infrastructure that eventually you would want. it's actually very cheap to get started.
Yeah.
It's not. Now, if you are choosing a vendor that, you need the full thing, you need the ATO before you get up and running, there are some additional costs there and some time and challenges with that, but it's nominal compared to some of the things that you can then use it for, if you're able to use it for, again, those bigger system change requests that, again, is really just a Herculean effort. And sometimes, honestly, in DOD, we'll have backlogs of system change requests that, for whatever reason, it's not considered critical. Maybe it's just something that, well, those desk level folks have to live with it. And, it's, again, they're living with it, but it's costing them 4 hours a day of
Right.
their work.
Yeah.
And if you can kind of build that story and build that vignette and sell that to leadership, you can get past the budget constraints.
Yeah, I know maybe it's different at the DOD, but when I was in business, we would have people who say, we need this. And I always thought, yeah, they do, but let's just wait till we hear a really loud cry or people yelling or getting up on their desks and demanding it, because we had limited resources, and we would try to say, okay, if it's a problem, maybe it needs to be a big problem before we address it, because we're spending all of our money in other places.
Exactly. Yep.
And I know it's probably different. We talked about cybersecurity, but how can the RPA technology move beyond the IT function so that more departments, agencies, and their stakeholders and citizens benefits? I found in my limited research that if you know about RPA, you know about RPA. But if you don't know about RPA, you don't really know about RPA. But when you learn about it, as I have over the last couple of years, it's an amazing tool that people should be using. So is it just educate? I know we're focused on research, education. I learned recently about something in California which saved people who wanted to extend their driver's licenses because of COVID. They couldn't show up and do that. So there was a RPA automation done, which in fact saved the government, state government, I think $13 million, and made all the people anxious over not being able to drive happy because they got their driver's license extended.
That sounds great to me.
Yeah. And then my thought was, as an economist, was why don't we do that in all 50 states? If it works in California, it probably works in New York or Washington, D.C. or Virginia. Right. And it wouldn't be that much cost to try to replicate it if we can.
Yeah.
But it would make the stakeholders feel better about where their tax dollars are going. They're getting a bigger return on their money. They're feeling better. I think that's really a great potential for RPA, because before I was in the academic world, and after I left the business world, I was in the congressional world, and we had so many constituents who always would say, I don't mind paying taxes. I understand my obligation as a citizen. I just wish I felt better about where it was being spent and what results we were getting. And I think with RPA, even though we're not focusing on the ROI, so to speak, I think RPA has a real opportunity to educate the stakeholders on, this is what we're trying to do, and this is how we're doing it even more efficiently, so your tax dollars are being better well spent.
Mm-hmm. So I think the good news is, at least within DOD, a lot of the RPA deployment that we've seen has actually been in the business areas. So it's getting out to those communities. Maybe not, in my opinion, to all the communities as much as it could, but it actually has started in the business line. So it's those desk level folks that are say, hey, I've heard about this. I have some ideas here. So that's really where it's kind of taken hold in DOD, which is refreshing.
Yeah, and that's a positive note too. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you.
Yeah, so I think that's really good. Now, I think there's always work to be done though about kind of communication strategy, because I think the more we can share, the better. Because if I've built an automation that does, X, Y, and Z, and somebody else can benefit from that, I will give them the automation, or I will set it up in a way that they can use it. So that's one of the premises that our program has always had, is anything that we have, we're going to share. Because I'm a taxpayer, you're a taxpayer, there's no reason to recreate this. Or if maybe you need a certain tweak to that, here it is, have the code. You can change it however you want. It's your responsibility now. Right. So as we have the DOD RPA consortium, are there other mechanisms to share information on what we've been doing, sharing automations, et cetera. I think we just need to take advantage of all of those opportunities. I know there is a lot of interest in RPA. We see it being asked about even on, by the Hill in certain congressional requests. We'll see it mentioned in, testimony statements. So, definitely we're trying to get the vignettes, the success stories out there, but there's always room for improvement, especially in the organization the size of DOD.
Yeah. Yeah, and as to your point, we're all on the same team as Americans, and if we can make the government work better, more efficiently, and I think that's a positive thing for everybody and unites us all as a country.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I have one more question, and then we're going to go ahead and conclude. And that question is, Erica, do you think RPA will move eventually beyond just the kind of the back office, traditional financial HR side and into mission? Or what do you think the opportunity there is for looking at RPAs on different mission focused programs?
I think absolutely. I think there's probably cases in DOD that it is actually already moving into mission. So I know the Joint Strike Fighter program was using RPA. So I think we've already kind of gotten there, and now hopefully it'll continue. I also think that there's a big opportunity not just to use RPA, but to use RPA in conjunction with other technology. So RPA is great for the standard repetitive if-then type rule-based processes. But we all know that, yes, there's a huge opportunity space there, but if you can expand the arms of that a little bit, there's so much more. So can you use RPA in conjunction with other technology like machine learning and other AI type things?
Yeah, I think that's exciting too.
Yeah.
And I think we'll see that sooner rather than later. In fact, we probably have some of that going on already, but I'm just not aware of it.
We have one in my office. So for example, the UMD automation that I mentioned earlier, that was just doing the data entry into the accounting system to clear the unmatched transaction. We actually, recognized even early on when we were going through the as-is process, the individuals are spending a lot of time doing the research. So they're researching that unmatched transaction, and then through that research, they're identifying what the corrective action needs to be. And then they're populating that spreadsheet, and then it kicks off the RPA. Well, recognizing the amount of time that was being spent on the research, we said, hey, could we use data? Could we and use machine learning to predict what the corrective action needs to be on future unmatched transactions? So we actually just had a prototype built that uses 3+ years of historical data to then predict what those corrective actions need to be, where then the RPA components can take that and then automate those last few steps. So how do you get that upfront research part addressed through other technology, machine learning, and then have that used in conjunction with RPA? And we're pretty excited about it. We think there's a lot of other use cases there to, again, expand the benefit statement, and it really does get after even bigger, greater efficiencies when you can combine the technologies that are available.
Well, that is excellent. I'm glad to know that. That concludes today's webinar. I want to thank Erica Thomas from the Department of Defense for being with us today. Erica, you've been terrific. You're so gracious to share your time and your knowledge base with us. And look for more webinars, programs, and research in the weeks ahead from the RPA initiative. We all at George Mason think combining technology with personnel, trying to help our government work better, is an important objective for our country. And we think it's going to happen sooner rather than later. And we want to thank you for joining us, and everyone have a great day.
Thanks for having me.